morning, and thank you for joining us today at Time Use Week. Today is November 25th. On November 25th, 1960, 60 years ago, some women were kidnapped and murdered by order of uh, the dictator Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. Patria Minerva and Maria Teresa Mirabal were kidnapped and murdered. They became a symbol of the fight against gender violence in Latin America. And some decades later, the United Nations enshrined this day, 25th of November, as the International Day against Gender Violence against women specifically. I thought it was well worth mentioning. Let's now go on to the presentations, or well, to the topic today. Today we have Jané-Llopis, Arnau Queralt, Gabriel Castañares, Laia, Bonet, and Núria Parlon. Each speaker will speak for about 6 minutes, and then we will have a little time for questions from people who are following us. The point is to identify the links between time use policies and the Sustainable Development Goals. In fact, time use policies have a close link with some of those SDGs and Agenda 2030. The starting question is, how can time use policies contribute to attaining the SDGs? First, we'll hear from Eva Jané-Llopis, who is the Director of Health-Related SDGs and Social Innovation at the ESADE Business School, and is also a member, an advisor to the Advisory Council for Sustainable Development of the Government of Catalonia. You have the floor. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. I'll just go over Agenda 2030 and remind us all of the 17 SDGs, which you can see on the screen. Remind us of our global challenges, poverty and environmental degradation. And 15 years of the 30 that we had set forth for achieving these goals have already transpired. We've made some progress in terms of gender equality, which is goal 5, also partnership for goals. We've also seen a significant reduction in child mortality. However, the progress achieved hasn't quite happened at the pace that it should have. In terms of 13 climate action, well, we've seen, for instance, a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but not quite at the pace that we intended. SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, growth, and that. And of course, the COVID pandemic has had an impact on all this. It's actually set us, of course, made us backtrack. For the first time, for instance, since 1998, poverty in the world has started to increase again. So it's really important for us to align our policies. Time use policies, which we're debating this week, will be central to achievement of the SDGs or implementation of the agenda. So let's start by looking at how time use policies might contribute to the SDGs. Well, we can see that they can have an impact on at least half of them. Work-life balance policies and gender equality policies and policies that promote more compact working hours have impact, for instance, on SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. Working hours are much longer in Spain than in any other European country, as we all know. We have less of a break at the end of our working day, and we get, on average, 1.5 hours less sleep than our fellow Europeans. But an extra hour of sleep has been shown to increase economic productivity and avert economic loss. The United States loses more than 1 million working days a year because of people not getting enough sleep, it's been estimated. So increased productivity, reduction of economic loss, all of that ties in with time use policies. Also, a better alignment of official time with resting and activity time would tie in with the proposal for us to join the Greenwich Mean Time, which should be our appropriate time slot. Sorry, I'm getting a little noise here. Some companies are starting offer their employees a possibility to devote some of their working day to volunteering. That's been shown to enhance productivity. Also, increased free time and leisure time has also been shown to have a positive impact on the economy. So all of that ties in with SDG 8, but it also has an impact on SDG well-being. It, good time use policies increase exercise, improve health. They help you with your circadian rhythm, which means a reduction, for instance, in cardiovascular conditions. There's also a link to environmental impact. You can have more sustainable cities and towns. We can also see an impact on climate action. For instance, a compact working day reduces midday mobility. That's already been shown in some cities, which means reduced environmental pollution and so improvement in emissions. And some companies that have implemented compact working hours have also found reduced water consumption, mistakes, also less energy consumption, SDG 7, and also there's been more equality. That's SDG 10. There's also an impact on SDG 5, gender equality. Any policy that has to do with reducing working hours for men so that there's more equality for women in the labor market, and also a greater balance between household work time and between men and women is also a big also makes a big difference, a reduction of the gender gap. And then there's also an impact on quality education, SDG 4, because reduction in working hours, well, or rather, children's mm, overall hours are very tightly packed because of their parents' working hours. So, better time use policies would help children improve their household routines, go to bed earlier, would a more stable routine. North European countries, this type of measure has improved school performance. Well, there are some issues in schools that are that are a serious problem in Spain, but they also enhance quality of life. The purpose of time use policies is to improve people's well-being, and that is also the purpose of Agenda 2030. In any case, we know that if some time use policies proposed were implemented, they would directly contribute towards Agenda 2030, and that would be an important thing because we're not currently on the right track. And that's it from me for now. Thank you, Eva. We will now hear from Gabriel Castañares, who is the Director General of Leveraging Policies for the Achievement of Agenda 2030 of the Government of Spain. Gabriel, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Luis. Good morning to my fellow panelists and to people who are following us online in different ways. Thank you very much for your invitation to the overall event and to this particular panel. You have all our support in terms of implementing Agenda 2030, and we absolutely agree that there is a link between time use policies and achievement of the SDGs by Spain. Harmonized use of time and good time management are essential from our perspective in order to reach sort of these policies are completely in line, as Eva just pointed out, with many of the SDGs, but also with the overall vision of Agenda 2030, because it's about promoting gender equality and then better well-being. One of the points would be the non-commodified use of joint spaces and joint time, management of time beyond working time, better family relations, better provision of caregiving within the family or household setting. And we're fully and keenly aware of the need to make daily well-being, caregiving, challenges that our country is facing. We think the recovery plan for the pandemic will be really can be really helpful. For instance, it will make working hours more flexible and therefore make it easier to have a work-life balance.
I would al- I would like to also recognize that there are a lot of awareness raising processes and negotiation processes as part of this individual and collective negotiation, as well as the regulation that the different public administrations have imposed. There are historic processes. We have managed to achieve great things in working conditions by fighting for workers' rights. In Barcelona, you're fully aware of this because 80 years ago in Barcelona, people fought for shorter working hours, and that's what you achieved. So, trying to move towards time use policies and related to the 2030 agenda, one of the SDGs that's closest to this is number 5, gender equality. And in terms of leverage policies, number 2, zero hunger. So, as for a diagnosis, I would like to provide some data that are quite telling about the imbalance that we are experiencing right now and how the different equality policies can help us bridge that gap. Something that obviously impacts families and a lot of people. Let me just give you a couple of examples. For instance, we have unemployment rate figures. Most of it impacts women. And seasonality of jobs is also quite a female phenomenon. Um, Sometimes they get part-time jobs, even though that's not what they applied for, and most of them are women with a wage gap of more than 6,000 euros a year. In Spain, women devote more than double their time to family-related matters and chores than men. So all of this explains this huge gap, uh, a distinction between the genders and how they use their time. Now, based on these situations, one of the signs of progress that we have witnessed in the past few months and years in terms of work-life balance policies that can also impinge on the 2030 agenda on other SDGs, such as the fight against poverty or decent work. However, in terms of time use policies and reducing this gender gap, there are several that are quite important, such as the minimum live revenue or income. Um, those people who do not have enough income to make a decent living, they can enjoy this minimum subsistence income that can protect especially single-parent households and children because they are the most vulnerable in this situation. And most of these single-parent households are run by women. We're talking usually talking about women here, and it's estimated that 90% could use this resource. So we believe that this could be a contribution to bridge this gender gap and to implement policies that could somehow be more efficient at managing the situations and avoiding having to have multiple jobs and while enjoying a decent amount of time that the parent needs, obviously, to take care of their family. Then there's also the plan to fight against the wage gap and for a work-life balance. It is extremely important, especially given the current situation in our country, to improve this work-life balance so that for the same kind of work, everyone gets paid the same. And obviously to fight any discrimination or unequal scenario, such as due to motherhood or other kind of specific circumstances related to family. And then there's one final element that is also considered a leverage policy for these Agenda 2030 is the plan for equal opportunities. This is a plan that aims to reduce discrimination based on gender, and it is being redefined currently for 2021-2022. As I was saying, there are a lot of interactions between policies that are conducive to a better use of time. And amongst these leverage policies, the fight against poverty, social exclusion, and inequality. This is a more cross-cutting element. We can see it on SDG 1, no poverty, zero hunger, SDG 2, and as Eva said, also good health and well-being, quality education. This is quite important as well in order to ensure equal opportunities amongst the different societal groups, regardless of their income, and mostly decent work. As we said earlier, it is fundamental in order to avoid multiple jobs as well as well spending longer than 8 hours a day to work. So to be able to make ends meet. And there's something else I would like to mention as well, which is the increase of the minimum wage up to about 900 euros, and how it helps rescue the most vulnerable people. It is a tool available at our disposal to avoid these extreme circumstances. So let me finish with the time that has been allotted to me by Luis by drawing one conclusion. I believe that time use policies are an element that is crisscrossed naturally with all kinds of necessary policies to get to 2030 with all these SDGs made a reality. And they are a key tool for the kind of country we want to have in 2030, 40, and 50, a more sustainable, more inclusive country with equal opportunities for everyone. So that's it. Thank you all very much. And I'm here available if you want to continue with this discussion. Okay, thank you, Gabriel, because you complied with the time. And now we give the floor to Arnau Queralt, who is the director of the Advisory Council for Sustainable Development of the Catalan government. Arnau, you have the floor. Okay, great, Luis. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here with you. We have Eva, who's also a member of the Advisory Council, but also with Gabriel, Núria, and Laia. We are a group behind this promotion of the Agenda 2030, which means fighting for a lot of issues that tend to be seen separately, whereas we believe that from a political point of view, we should be more consistent and fight this cause collectively. That's what we tend to claim, the four of us. We don't have a lot of time here. It's not something that we can see in one single SDG, but if you take time out of the agenda, it doesn't hold water. It's something that's invisible. It's not a material notion. Sometimes we don't attach it that it's necessary significance, but it's present everywhere. Eva and Gabriel mentioned it already. Time is ever present. We can see it in every SDG. We cannot speak about fight against poverty without time use policies. How many people need to juggle several works in order to make ends meet and have the bare minimum for their family? Uh, how many food-related problems are due to the fact that we don't have enough time and we prioritize quick fixes, fast solutions instead of devoting its proper time, education. Obviously, it is impossible to make headway with these headings without bearing time use policies in mind. SDG 5 and SDG 8, decent work. Time is a factor, or the lack thereof, that brings to types of work that are not decent, that cannot be defended. And that's very important as well. Now, how is the Catalan government tackling this? And also from the point of view of the Agenda 2030. There's a plan that was adopted, which is the National Plan for the Agenda 2030. It's a cross-cutting plan that involves all the different departments of the government. It was adopted in September 2019, and it's being assessed as we speak because it gets evaluated every year and updated by including more strategic elements, trying to maximize these goals and to adapt them to the Catalan reality. But in 2019, we already had several commitments that had to do with the Agenda 2030 and with time. Let me just give you some examples. SDG 3, well, the Catalan government had already committed itself to changing lunch times, meal times, so that they could be healthier. SDG 4, also time use reform in schools. Shared responsibility and gender equality, SDG 5, and also time uses for men and women, bearing in mind their social and cultural and economic contributions as well. And there was yet another commitment from the Catalan government, which was to promote more flexible working hours so that we could have a more rational use of time based on productivity and competitiveness. So these were some of the commitments expressed by the government, and they all were conducive to a time use reform and to the adoption of new time use policies. I could also speak about the Live Better plan, which was adopted some months ago. It was promoted from the Time Use Reform Office, which answers to the Catalan presidency and aims to establish a time use framework for Catalan policies. And that obviously is more closely linked to Agenda 2030. They are part and parcel of one another. But not only that, there's an international agreement for economic progress with social protection that was adopted on June this year. It's an agreement that was signed by the government, trade unions, business owner associations, and they all integrate as their commitments to promote a better use of time. We also have Working Relations Council in Catalonia, a paramount body that is making quite an effort. It involves the government, trade unions, and business owners, and they're issuing a lot of recommendations about how to integrate SDGs as part of their work-related policies, and time use reform plays a vital role, also time management. Yet another important item on this list, which is the Act 17, 2015 for equal rights and opportunities for men and women. And that includes a whole chapter on time management. So we have a law, we have plans, we have documents, but there's always a gap between what's written on those documents and then real policies. And I think we need to be humble about this. We already have the tools at hand in Spain, in the provincial government, in Barcelona. We have a lot of those documents, even though they're not being deployed or fully enforced at the pace that we would like to see. And that's also important to know. Let me just give you a specific example of what I mean with SDG 5. Some months ago, the Statistical Office of Catalonia published a list of indicators for SDGs in Catalonia based on Eurostat's indicators. And there's one very specific indicator, which is time, especially when dealing with caring for other people. And the this number is quite scary, I have to say. I mean, we intuited that, but we didn't know for sure. And it's important to remember, in the year 2019, the percentage of men that were not working and they could care for other people was just 6.5%, whereas in the case of women, 39.3% could not work because they had to care for other people, take care for other people. That's only in Catalonia, and that happened last year. So it's important. It's quite telling about how time is used by men or women. So time has a social value for men, whereas women's time is not valued as much. And it's shameful. And we should know and fight this. Well, that's it for me. Let me just leave the door open as well, because there's a report we're working on from several departments. We are rethinking public policies, care policies, trying to introduce SDG 5. And time is extremely important from that point of view. I'm sorry, Luis. I used 2 more minutes than the ones I had been allotted, and time is important, so my apologies. It's okay. But there's something you said which is great food for thought. We have the ideas, we know what's to be done, but the problem is to act on it, to think how we do that. Well, thank you, Arnau. We now give the floor to Laia Bonet. She is a deputy mayor in charge of Agenda 2030, digital transition, sports, territorial metropolitan coordination, and animal welfare of the Barcelona City Council. So, Laia, you have the floor. Thank you, Luis. I have to say that I'm extremely pleased to be with all of you this morning and to listen to Eva first, Gabriel, Arnau, and what Núria will contribute later from the provincial government. As Arnau was saying, this is a group meets often because we are champions and we're not alone here. We are convinced of the significance of this narrative behind Agenda 2030 and what needs to be done to transform this into a reality. But let me start the way I should, which is to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And I would like to thank the Time Use Initiative coordinators for counting on the Barcelona City Council support to move ahead in time management. I know I don't have a lot of time, and I'll do my best to keep that time. But I was thinking about something I said during the opening of the Time Use Week the other day, on the fact that in the past few years we have seen an increasing number of people and institutions that have joined this cause, saying that time use initiatives are extremely important, which is good news. But as Arnau was saying, We should go beyond that message and start acting on it and showing real action. When one takes stock of the changes that have occurred around us in terms of time use, probably we should we should see many more such changes based on the strong messages that we have heard all along. So the other day I was wondering whether the pandemic could be that boost and that way to move forward so that we could realize that it's not enough to speak theoretically about this, but we should also change a lot of things that have to do with our own culture, with our habits, and to have this broad view, that broad picture, because time is all encompassing from that point of view. As I was saying, even though this pandemic has dire consequences for us, it could also be a wake up call for us. And time use policies could become um, extremely significant policies and not just second rate policies. They are part of a wide array of policies, obviously, and it's easy for any political party to include them in their program. But we need several things for this to be a reality. First, we need to remain vigilant and to see exactly how this process, this speeding up of digitalization process, is going to take place, because this digital transition has a very clear bearing on time and how time plays a role in our lives. If we asked what they thought about this, that telecommuting was here to stay, about 70% of them said that they felt okay. And that was a very relevant piece of data. So we have something that we didn't have some months ago, but let's be careful about this transition and how we implement telecommuting and therefore technology.
Watch out for the way we're implementing telecommuting and technology, because otherwise we might just end up adding further layers of inequality, probably with a cross-cutting impact, as Eva, Gabriel, and Arnau were saying, because of the way we use time in our daily routines and so forth. So let's watch out for this. Let's do this properly. Let's be very careful about the way we introduce technology in our lives. Let's be careful. Let's make sure that we can use them to culturally transform things that are having a negative impact on equality, only to create further layers of. And another point we need to do is make sure we put on the proper the goggles of awareness of the cross-cutting nature of these policies. Unless we do it this way, we just won't make it. If we don't bear in mind that every public policy has an impact on time use, there's no way we can make any progress. So, Agenda 2030 plays a significant role because it's about cross-cuttingness to begin with. I mean, you can't achieve Agenda 2030 unless you take a cross-cutting perspective. And since the time factor is, well, the time factor is not necessarily visible in every SDG, but it's present throughout them, as is innovation. You can't achieve Agenda 2030 unless you innovate in every single sphere of public policy, from the very first to the very last of the SDGs. We have to change the way we do everything. We need to innovate. We also need to wear the goggles of being aware of the impact of every single policy we implement on time in our lives and in our communities. I wanted to share these thoughts with you to begin with, and now I'll just zero in on what we're doing in Barcelona, what we've done. In Barcelona, we have analyzed all the programs we had in place in every one of our sectoral policies. Some of them with a 2021 horizon, others 2025, 2026, 2028, 2030. So we've put them all together on the table. We examined their objectives. We examined their compatibility with each of the SDGs and the underlying challenges behind those SDGs. So we haven't just circumscribed our analysis to the SDGs. We've looked at the 169 underlying challenges to see which of those depended on local action. And there we tried to be ambitious in setting our goals. We tried to establish Agenda 2030 at the city level, at the challenge level, and at the citywide level, not just the city council level. Okay, our objectives are for the city as a whole, whoever is responsible for every individual policy. So we have the government of Spain, we have the government of Catalonia, we have the provincial council. All of these levels of government come into play. And then we also have private operators, individuals, citizens, associations, companies, because there's no point in the city setting a series of goals unless we have a clear picture for where we want to end up as a city as a whole, particularly since there is an SDG that calls upon each and every one of us, public or private, individual or collective. So we've analyzed all of our programs and plans. We've checked their compatibility with the challenges, and of the 169 challenges, 139 have bearing on our city policies. We've tried to be really ambitious here. And then beyond this exercise of verifying compatibility, we revised the plans based on these objectives. And because the discourse behind Agenda 2030 is all very well, it's excellent, but you have to quantify objectives in both the SDGs and the challenges. You can only truly set objectives if you quantify them. Otherwise, you can't measure whether you're moving in the right direction and at the right pace. So we kind of have a snapshot of what kind of city we want by 2030. And we have quantified each of the challenges in practical terms. So we've set indicators that will tell us how well we're doing. And by the end of the year, we're going to have our first voluntary review of how we're doing. So we'll have two snapshots, where we are and where we want to be by 2030. And then will come the most difficult bit, fleshing out the necessary policies, both our own and everybody else's, needed to reach those objectives. How have we done that? How are we going to go about it? Well, with a cross-cutting approach. So our area is in charge of Agenda 2030, but it's interconnecting with all of the other sectoral areas in order to avoid the silo mentality. We don't want to impose on others, but we also don't want excessive compartmentalization. So we also have an academic consulting body, and we have a coordination. The consultative body includes 30 academics from environmental and social and economic science, highly prestigious people who have gone over the objectives that we had set on a cross-cutting basis for every area. So based on that and on the report that was adopted a couple of months ago, we will now have to assess where we stand in relation to the objectives, and then we will set up a committee with citywide actors. So yeah, beyond the city council, we'll be working with all the stakeholders which need to come to the table to assess, to fill in the gap between where we are now and where we want to be by 2030. So we're applying a approach in every sphere, including a cross-cutting approach in terms of the perspectives and points of view of the actors and stakeholders. So that is what we're going to, well, this is what we've done and what we're going to continue to work on to step boldly forward to operate all the kind of action needed in order to achieve the essential change in the environmental, social, and general sphere. Thank you very much, Laia. Thanks for this system-wide perspective and this forward-looking outlook. We will now hear from Núria Parlon Fourth, Vice Chair and member in charge of Agenda 2030 and the SDGs at Barcelona Provincial Council. Núria Parlon has the floor. Thank you, Lluís. Good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be sharing this discussion on time use policies and achievement of the SDGs from all these different perspectives of different institutions. It's a pleasure to be sharing this panel with Eva, Gabriel, Laia, and Arnau, because we do meet from time to time and discuss what we need to do to achieve the SDGs by 2030, and to discuss which public policies will help make this possible, as well as which indicators will tell us how we're doing. The fact is that we're not doing well for time. We need to be aware of that, unless we want to thwart the ambitions of our work. So I've been taking notes while listening to the others. We can measure time. My time needs to be measured and needs to be accounted for from different perspectives. From an individual or personal perspective, time is about well-being, health, wealth, and personal growth. At a society level, measuring time is about productivity, measuring the productivity of individuals based on what we've invested through our lifetimes, training, specialization, technification in an increasingly technological society, where the amount of hours devoted to production will be reduced, which means that a number of people will not be technologically skilled and we will have too much time on their hands because certain mechanical work will either be abolished or be carried out by machines. And of course, this can lead to increased poverty unless it's properly managed. But in any case, if we look at collective time, particularly on a day like today, November 25th, about gender violence, well, there's also the fact that we're not accounting properly for time, the time worked by women on an unpaid basis, which is not accounted for in national accounting, but contributes very significantly, as it's been shown, to the GDP of many countries, or most countries. So if the SDGs have to do with health, with well-being, with sustainable communities, and with the cross-cutting objective of achieving equality for 50% of the population, i.e. for women, well, clearly Agenda 2030 will very much depend on the extent to which we achieve close coordination between development and time use. And this is going to be very difficult when we talk about work-life balance. It's very complicated to achieve given our current use of time, with very long working hours, with very little time available for education or uh, retraining. A lot of time is also spent on social media. That is also something that takes its toll on rest time. The fact that you're always on top of likes also is a stressful factor. And of course, we're devoting less and less time to healthy living. It's difficult for us to stay disciplined in terms of staying active, in terms of exercise or contact with nature. And of course, it has an impact on how we view life, on how we relate to nature, and so on and so forth. Particularly considering that the majority of our population lives in high density urban areas that are highly polluted, which also challenges challenges. The Provincial of Barcelona is trying to innovate to achieve better distribution of time for citizens at large, and also better time organization within the Provincial Council of Barcelona, both in terms of working hours and in terms of our political action as an institution that provides advice to 311 municipalities or town councils for towns, the majority of which have populations of less than 10,000. So we want the Agenda 2030 to be implemented on an adapted basis at every local level, which means we have to be very careful how we advise local councils. A 10,000 strong town that wants to implement the SDGs is going to need a different kind of support and monitoring and follow up to track its policies. It's going to need much more support than a larger council. So, or a council for a larger town, rather. What all this means is that the Sustainable Development Agenda should not only be up to institutions, it needs to be shared with all the citizenry, which means we have to talk about how the cities themselves, not just the local councils, but the cities as a whole, become committed to the agenda. And that's why the background that the Provincial Council of Barcelona has in citizens' participation has to be tied in with implementation of the SDGs so that we can innovate. And since this word also came up in Laia's and Arnau's presentations, well, we have to talk about the importance of innovation, cross-cuttingness, and alliance building. It's really important. Um, So when we're innovating in public policy to turn that into development and measure it according to sustainable development goals, then we need innovative citizens' participation approaches so that citizens can really come on board. Also, from the perspective of exercise of democratic rights, which is no small thing. And in order to achieve all this, we need to organize our time properly because time is our most valuable individual resource. And of course, it has an impact on our productivity and on the distribution of wealth. According to this whole logic, we have started 3 actions. We've aligned our municipal action plan for 2020-2023 with Agenda 2030 by highlighting 130 transformative projects which express our commitment to Agenda 2030 and also enable us to work with a cross-cutting approach for the fleshing out of all the public policies that the Provincial Council of Barcelona is promoting as a supra-municipal and international body. We're also trying to train all of our teams and workers so that they can learn to work according to this logic. I mean, we are public policy managers. We need to start thinking in the language of the SDGs. So we need to restructure what we do. So in order to really streamline our successes and achievements, we need indicators. A set of indicators will be essential to any town that wants to align its local agenda with the SDGs. Santa Coloma de Gramenet, my town, has a population of 120,000. That goes for my town, but it also goes for much smaller towns. We all need a set of indicators that we can use to the same in order to be able to measure over the next few years or track how well we're doing in terms of implementing the SDGs, how we're contributing to development, and how well we're doing. The question is whether we are or not strengthening local democracy. And of course, uh, we are going to try to strengthen and support local councils so that they can work with experts if they don't have experts on board themselves, and so on and so forth. And finally, we've set up a practical approach for the implementation of the SDGs on a local level, and also something very important, which has to do with the building of alliances. That's SDG 17, but the alliances are necessary in any case in order to drive forward the 17 SDGs and their accompanying targets. So what we've done is create an instrument called communication and resource tools.
It's a guide that can help other local councils to interact with their society, whether they are organized as civil society or not, to help them move forward uh, with SDGs. So those are the tasks that we are promoting, and it's been a pleasure to be part of this discussion with all of you. Thank you, Núria Parlon. Thank you for everyone's contributions. We have 10 minutes left. We're allowed to remain until 10 past. So hopefully you'll have time to answer some questions. One of those has to do with indicators. I believe that both Laia and Núria could take this. In the case of Barcelona, how do you include time use policies as part of those indicators? And how many of such indicators are related to time use policies? We cannot hear you, Laia. I'm afraid you're muted. Sorry. You're right. My mic was off. What I wanted to say is that I could have anticipated this question and have the real data with me, but I don't. We could I could try to gather that information and send it to you because I don't know exactly how many indicators are connected to time use policies. However, we have used indicators in all cases. Let's see, how can I phrase this? We've used indicators that allowed us to quantify more accurately how much progress has been made towards achieving SDGs. But there's something else that is also important, because otherwise this could be detrimental to us when thinking about new strategies. I said that we pictured the kind of Barcelona we want for 2030, but we also have the actual picture of what is the city like today and how much of a gap there is. There's a commitment in our work, which is to currently update everything we do on the basis of those indicators. Once we have data, we can realize what else can be improved. In the next few years, a lot of things will have to change because those indicators are becoming more and more important in the way we work. I mean, they've always been important from a theoretical point of view, but we can see how they reflect on reality. So sometimes we've hit upon circumstances for which we didn't have any indicators, so we had to create them from scratch. But everyone represented here and many other institutions are working on this, and I'm sure you know why I mentioned this, because we're talking about public policies. There are a lot of people who are using good practices, best practices, examples we can all learn from. And as part of this implementation process and trying to localize those criteria and assessing how much progress we're making, there's quite an increase, a positive one, I must say, of multilateral relations amongst cities and amongst institutions. One of the fields we're most active about from the International Relations Department that I'm heading is an exchange of best practices among cities. So that's one of the areas we're working the most right now, sharing indicators to see whether they can be useful and come in handy for us. So I'm sure that even though I don't have the specific piece of data I can tell you about, I'm sure that in the next 6 months, probably months rather than years, we will advance much more from the point of view of exchanging indicators. Many of them haven't been created yet, I'm sure, but they will help us move forward, including the time factor. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll ask a question to all of you, and please try to answer it in just 1 minute. In your opinion, what would be the initiative, the innovative, urgent proposal, the most outstanding one, the most salient one, the one that can really drive time use policies forward? So, what would be the priority for you? Eva, it's a very specific question. I mean, I wouldn't say innovative because they're already here. You might not think they're innovative, but I'd be hard pressed to choose one. You know, it's like which child do you love the most? That's not a fair question to ask, right? I think all those measures exist already, but they need to be implemented. They shouldn't be seen as secondary policies, as Laia was saying, but rather they need to be top-notch priorities for us and show goodwill and see how they can be put in motion. So it's all about how rather than what. We already know what needs to be done. We've been discussing all these policies all along. So the challenge is how to implement that? Yes, I think so. Okay, Arnau or Gabriel. Sure, Gabriel can go first. Thank you. Thank you. That's to make up of the time we lost earlier. No, I believe that my colleague here was right, and we already have a set of policies that need to be implemented to achieve those time use policies to ensure working hours that allow us to enjoy work-life balance, to have mobility services that ensure that our fellow citizens that need to travel far to go to their job do not spend half a day traveling from the outskirts of cities into the city centers. We're talking about essential workers, industrial workers. This is a vicious circle because their jobs pay less, which means that oftentimes um, they have no other choice than to devote more time to their work than anything else. So I don't think it's about finding one specific innovative solution, um, be they creative as they are. It's about setting things in motion. There's a lot of work ahead of us. The gender gap, we mentioned, the social gap, this kind of distinctions we can identify from a territorial point of view. If you take a look at Barcelona and the metropolitan area, city centers and the suburbs, this is fundamental so that we can achieve the right time management and a better work-life balance. Okay, maybe the term innovative threw you off, but let's speak about specific political initiatives. Uh, I do have one, work-life balance policies. In Spain, I have to say that we are not precisely at the forefront of Europe. And those who are most hardly hit are women. Um, which obviously pay the price of these uh, disorderly arrangements in Spain, which come from very long ago. Wouldn't it be better to offer help towards achieving this work-life balance? Arnau, okay, so everything you guys said and more, because I don't mean to overlap with your opinions, but breaching that gap between the policies we adopted, what's already authorized, discussed, and agreed upon. Second, is there any specific tool? Well, I believe that this minimum subsistence income could be a vital tool to bridge this gap. And then alliances. The provincial government of Barcelona, the Barcelona City Council, the Catalan government, they are all part of this partnership towards Agenda 2030. The COVID crisis has stopped us somewhat, but obviously that alliance is still alive. We have the trade unions, we have the business owners associations, and we can all work together and to promote time use initiatives. And something else that might not be seen as innovative, which is those 15 minutes um, 15-minute city. It's quite a famous notion right now. How can we plan our city so that people can enjoy a full life in just 15 minutes, moving from where they are, finding their job, and enjoying their social life within that scope? Thank you. Thank you, Arnau. We ran out of time, so very quickly, Laia and Nuria, please. Yes, very briefly. The 15-minute city would be an update of the district-based Barcelona in our neighborhoods, as former Mayor Jordi Areu used to promote. Names change, and obviously we need to be aware of the specific resources that our institutions enjoy at a given moment. But it's linked to what Gabriel said earlier. Very, very quickly, I'm trying to answer Luis' question. How can we do that? Well, but by making visible the time we use now and we're not aware of it. So all kinds of time use, not only working hours. And where should it be visible? In public policies. So in transportation policies, in public subsidies, in everything we do, which means making care time visible, mobility time visible, work-life balance, um, home tasks and chores, all of this time that is used and spent is not visible. So that's where we should start. Thank you, Laia. Nuria, you'll be the last speaker. I agree with what Laia said. As I mentioned this earlier, we need to be able to quantify invisible time and to attach it its proper value to ensure the well-being of our communities and of cities in general. It's also important when we design public policies at the different levels of government to integrate how long, how much time people need to enjoy the best living conditions from the point of view of health, training, and how they can contribute to the common good. So we need to quantify and measure all such policies to know exactly uh, what kind of price do we pay for them, but also what benefit they bring to citizens that will help us see these policies as development. It's part of the sustainable development agenda. It's been a common thread amongst everything we said, and it's linked to time uses. So redistribution of wealth based on public policies. Uh, it's important because that's how we justify them, but also in the fight against poverty, inequalities, achieving gender equality. But all of this translates into time, and that should be part of our public policies as well, because it's essential. And I think that we've proved this, or at least I've done my best to demonstrate this when I spoke earlier. Okay, thank you all for your contributions. I think that we now have a very clear picture of how all of these SDGs are linked to time management policies, and they are part and parcel of any sustainable development initiative. If we don't have proper time use policies, it is impossible to achieve any SDG. Let me just remind you that at 3 in the afternoon, there will be another panel discussion as part of the Time Use Week, the European dilemma of suppressing daylight savings change. Thank you. The European